Yes, I'm a consultant for BIM data and digitalization, and I started my professional career with over ARUP in London, and I lived and worked in London for 7 years. Originally, I'm from Germany. I'm based in Frankfurt, and at the end of 2012, I moved back to Germany, and I live in Frankfurt again now. Today, I'm here, and I'm not talking on behalf of ARUP. I'm talking on behalf of the European Commission. And this is one of my projects I'm doing at the moment. And we heard something about BIM standards this morning. And I found it really interesting to see that. But I also got a bit confused, and I don't know how you feel, because we heard so many terms about BIM standards and how many nations are doing something in terms of BIM standards. And I would like to go into a bit more detail on that and hopefully clarify a little bit of that. I hope you can understand me okay, and I hope the translators can catch up with what I'm saying. So this talk now is about a project which is funded by the European Commission. It's a 2-year project, and it's called the EU BIM Task Group. And my role on that is I'm the co-chair of this task group, and also, as it says here, I'm head of delivery. What are we delivering? This is what I'm going to tell you now. I'm going to show you. Let's start and have a look about the market we are talking about. The European construction market is enormous. It is really, really big. We are talking about 1.2 trillion euros. A UK trillion is 1,000 billions, I think. So it's the European billion. It is enormous. We are talking roughly 10% of GDP across Europe. That is a massive industry, a massive market. In this market employs about 14.9 million people. Again, that's big. And these 14.9 million people are organized in roughly 3.1 million organizations. Because one characteristic of the construction sector is it is very fragmented. Not only in Germany, not only in Poland, but across the entire European Union. We see very small enterprises, we see small practices of architects and engineers, 3 people, 5, 10. An organization with 100 people normally is already considered as a big organization. So that brings a lot of challenges with it. So 95% are small and medium enterprises. So this is what we are talking about. This sector has started to move now towards digitalization. And it has been sleeping for a long time like a big giant. And this is where we are now. It is now starting to move. What we also see is another number, and that is challenging and concerning. That is 35%. Because people say, on average, on a construction project, we have 35% waste. Waste in time and waste in money. And that comes from a misunderstanding of clients' needs, miscommunication, rework, recreation of data. Just think about how often have you done a calculation and then you had to throw it away and start again because something else has changed, or someone has not given you the right information and you had to start all over again. How often has that happened? Or poor or no information management. What happened when we, as the construction sector, moved from the drawing boards to the computers? What people call the third industrial revolution, IT. We did not change our processes. Or even worse, we started emailing and attaching models and attachments to emails, and we just sent information to a huge number of people, and we completely lost control over our data and information on construction projects. And this all adds up to 35% waste. Now you can do the math, 35% of 1.2 trillion. Here's our business case for doing something. There are a couple of other interesting trends that we can observe. One is on the left-hand side, there are global figures, the European figures. I can also tell in Germany it's the same. People have looked at the productivity per head in our sector. And over the last 40 years, this has gone down. It's declining. All other industries, automotive, aviation, they all increase productivity through automation, digitalization, and so on and so on. And we are slower. We're working slower than we were 40 years ago. That is insane. Organizations such as Accenture have compared the degree of digitalization across different industry sectors. And what you can see here is the construction sector comes up second last. So that high number means a low degree of digitalization. And again, they looked at processes and they looked at how we operate as a sector. And that's an interesting study. And also, again, that is a bit concerning. So where we are at the moment is we're still operating in this paper-based, in our siloed way of working. We are still very confrontational in our behaviors. We have not yet adopted a fully collaborative and optimized workflow and way of working. The World Economic Forum and the Boston Consulting Group have looked at different innovative technologies, and they came up with this matrix, what they think is highly likely to happen and also will have a high impact on the industry. And when you look at the top right over there, that says integrated BIM. So it's very likely to happen, as they think, and it will have a high impact. And there are other technologies such as 3D printing or drones, big data analytics. So it's all there, laser scanning, augmented reality. None of those as a single technology are seen as having such a big impact on us in the future. So now, as I said, I'm talking on behalf of the European Union or the European Commission, representing the public sector in this game. And there is recognition now by the public sector that someone in this move now, when the giant starts moving, someone has to take the lead. And that is seen, that needs to be the public sector. So, and they think only if we all work together and if we apply some leadership from governments and public sector, then we can drive and earn some economic and other values for the entire sector. One reason is that public procurement accounts still for over 30% of total construction. There's another big number. So what the Commission introduced a couple of years ago already is e-procurement. And that is seen as a big game changer. And the reasons for doing that is they wanted to simplify the whole value chain, and also they really tried to give the small and medium enterprises better access to the market and better chances or equal chances for winning jobs. And now looking back, they can already say that some of the organizations have achieved between 5 and 20% savings through the change process. So what does that mean for the taxpayer? 5% saving just again adds up to 100 billion. So these enormous numbers that's our lever. And there is the Public Procurement Directive, which was published in February 2014. And that already gave some rules and some direction, but it was not a mandate. It did not say you have to use BIM, for example. Unfortunately, that would have been nice. But what at least it said, we should use electronic means of communication, and it does mention BIM. So it says building information modeling as an example. Unfortunately, they call it a tool. We know it's not a tool. They call it a tool, but they said they encourage public procurers to make better use and more use of BIM. So that's good. That is already going in the right direction. What the European Commission, what they see and what is happening now, and this is also something we heard this morning, is there is now an increasing number of nations within the European Union starting their own strategic route to BIM. And this is what we heard this morning, what was called a BIM Standard, and I would like to use a different term for that. For me, a standard is something that is being developed and published in one of the official standardization bodies. And that is, at international level, it's ISO, European national, it's CEN, and then we have all the nations have their own standardization body in Germany, that's DIN. And there's an agreement between these organizations. So if something is a standard at ISO level, the European level, CEN, they can adopt this. They can. They decide what they want to do with it. Once something becomes a European, a CEN standard, the national standardization bodies have to adopt it. There's no can as a must. So once something is a European standard, it has to be mirrored at national level. And I think that is important. And that's why a standard is something different than a program, for example. What we see here is these national programs which are evolving now, where public procurers or ministries or governments say, okay, we want to implement BIM, whatever that means, I'll come to that, and we will introduce a program for doing that. And that is now starting in a lot of these nations here. This is a typical curve for an industry adopting change or innovation, which is a typical curve from, you have some innovators and early adopters. And we heard already this morning, for example, the UK or Singapore internationally, and some others were certainly here in this bit. And now we seem to have reached that point here where we're now all on this journey more or less, and only a few of us are on the laggard side. The concern of the European Commission is now, if they all do their own thing, and these things look different and the programs look different, what is this going to do to the European construction market? It will slow it down. People will get confused, we will have contradicting rules, and especially all these organizations that want to work internationally, they will have to follow all these different rules, and that will weaken the market. And what we want to be is a very strong and a very competitive market that can compete with Africa, with America, and with East Asia, because we see what's going on there. And this was then the start of this EU BIM Task Group. The vision from the Commission is they want greater value for public money. We're talking taxpayer money here. They want to increase the openness, fairness, competitiveness, and the productivity of the market. And they want to stimulate growth and innovation. It's a 2-year program. It started in February this year. It is co-funded by the European Commission. There's a bit of a gap in the funding, as very often these things happen. The lead contractor with the European Commission is the chair of the EU Task Group, and that is the UK. So the European Commission pay 115,000 euros, and the UK pay 35,000 euros roughly to fill that gap. Our task is to create what they call a common framework for BIM across Europe in public works. And that framework consists of a handbook with recommendations, what the nations should do, complemented with video, maybe websites and other material, case studies and things like that. And we're also talking here today is part already of the development and the rollout of what we're doing. The target groups of this are the estate owners. So all these organizations like in Germany, like German Rail, for example, who operate and build the German railway. Or it could be building portfolio owners, airports, and all the others, as long as they are public sector. And also the policy makers, so the ministries and others are also the target groups. The task group currently has 21 members. 21 states have signed a letter of support to the European Commission, and they send representatives to what we call the General Assembly meetings in Brussels. We had one of these big meetings in February. This was the kickoff meeting. We also have a smaller group that is called the steering group. That is 9 people, and these are the people who are doing the actual work. What we do, as I said, we're talking to our target groups. We are gathering the demand. What is it that you need, guys? And we are then talking to the enablers, which are the standards bodies, the industry associations, academia as well. And we also obviously engage with the supply chain. So the software vendors are very important, industry actors, and a few others. Our timeline, as I said, we started in February 2016. We carried out a survey, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And we want to have the survey report published before Christmas, and also a first draft of our handbook just before Christmas. There's still a bit of work to do, I can tell you. Early next year, we will have a next meeting with the General Assembly to present the draft handbook and to have it reviewed and discussed with the group. And then hopefully mid next year, we will have the handbook finished, and then we can roll it out and have a few more conferences and communications. So what is this handbook about? First of all, there will be a section in it talking about why should you do BIM, whatever that means. What we call the value proposition for digitalization or BIM. What are the benefits? What is the business case? Why doing it? But there is a second question. Why should we all do it aligned? And why should we work together in doing that and not doing our own thing? This is the why bit in the handbook. There is also a what bit in the handbook, and that will talk about some key principles, so that we develop a common understanding what BIM actually means. Very often, when two people have a conversation about BIM, one person has a 3D model with a few objects and information in mind, and the other person might think about BIM as a process. And these two people have a conversation, and they don't even realize that they're talking about different things. And this is what we see, and what is also hindering us from picking up pace. So this is why we want to develop, or we have, a common European performance level. You saw this morning in the example from the UK, the levels, level 0, level 1, level 2, which is the current level in the UK. This kind of thing. We want to have clearly defined criteria. What is BIM in EU at a first common performance level? And if you are very clear, if you have 5 things, let's say, everyone can understand, okay, I am doing all this and I can do it or not. But that takes this uncertainty away around this term BIM, which is not clearly defined. Very important as well, we are not rewriting standards. Standards are with the standardization bodies. We're not doing that. We are using the standards massively. They're very, very important for us. We are not developing them. And how I already said, we are understanding needs, requirements, understanding the status quo, where are we at the moment, and then develop the aligned framework. So a lot of organizations are undertaking surveys at the moment. Very often we receive some questionnaires. We did the same. We found it very important to understand the status quo. So we developed a questionnaire with 33 questions. We sent it to our 21 members, and we asked for one single response per country. And that was a task to the General Assembly, make sure they coordinate and give us one good response. This is the state of BIM in our country. We received 16 responses, and analyzing these responses was very valuable and very important for us to determine the state of public BIM programs across Europe, to identify why are these people doing it, these nations, what are their drivers, to discover the common principles, where are we already aligned across Europe, what are we already doing all the same, and then how to develop, well, we said the common practice and identify common practice. So just a few examples from the nations that have said, yes, we are using BIM, and we said, okay, in which sector is it very much progressed? And so you can just see that between infrastructure and buildings. Buildings is still a little bit ahead, but infrastructure is certainly catching up, and there's a lot of development currently in infrastructure. Why is that? Because normally the biggest public procurers are procuring infrastructure, road, rail, airports, waterways, that's infrastructure. and the projects are bigger. So we asked, are you aware of the use of BIM in your country? And from all 16 responses, everyone said, yes, BIM is being used in our country. And they also said, yes, it has massively increased over the last 2 years. We said, how well are you organized? And some said, we're actually quite basic. Some said, yeah, we do have some structure, but we're not really well organized. And just a few said, we're very well structured, actually. And then one of the key questions was, do you have an active program for the implementation of BIM, which is led by a public sector, by a ministry or one of your biggest public organizations? And if yes, in what state is it in? And 11 responses said, yes, we have an active program. 3 of them said, we have already executed a national plan, so almost done. 6 said, we are implementing something. 2 said, yeah, we're making progress. 4 said, we've just started. And 1 said, we haven't started, but we've thought about it. So that's already a quite good picture, I think. What we did with all the survey responses is we used this matrix here, because what we as the BIM Task Group, we can only give recommendations. We cannot mandate something. A national government can say, or a procurer can say, we will only do this in the future because we're the client. We can't do this. We can recommend. We've developed recommendations using this matrix. So we looked at the survey and we looked where have we consensus, where are we already aligned, and where have we already standards in development or in place for something. And again, we looked at what we see as a great impact or great value for doing something. And this is the methodology we used. And I said earlier, we asked one question about the drivers. Why are you doing a national program? That is a very important question, because if you want to help someone on his way, you have a different conversation with someone who is value-driven compared to someone who is cost-driven. Let me explain that. Here at the bottom left, we see that is, for example, an organization or a person who's responsible for delivering a construction project on time and on budget. Doesn't care about anything else, doesn't care about operations or anything else, or maybe a bit about operations, but it's just focused on CapEx, capital investment, and delivering a project. The people up here in this area are more concerned, like the European Commission, about jobs, about the prosperity of the sector, about well-being of people, about delivering good services to people, about taxpayers' money, and all these other things. And that is much bigger, and that's what we call that value-driven. And depending on where the drivers are and what a person is responsible for, you should have a different conversation along this line. What we then developed was this strategic framework, which we will use then to give recommendations. This is like a very simple spider diagram. You have the 4 corners here, and let's start at the bottom. Public leadership is very, very important. As I said earlier, if we all, 14 million people, start doing something bottom up without any leadership, where will we go? In all directions. How fast will we go? Very slow. Therefore, our recommendation to the nations is you have to apply leadership. You have to come up with some drivers for your people, for your organizations. You have to develop a vision and some goals. You should have a strategy, how you want to implement this. And you should supply or provide a sponsor, a person who understands all this. You should provide funding, a funded program. You need resources to do all this. And ideally, you have something like a task group or a group of experts who can then start implementing the strategy from top down. When you started that, you can then start to engage with your communities and to bring people on board, talk to the industry, get them engaged, and create networks and create the bottom up in the direction that you steer it. In parallel, you should start to develop a framework, because there will be lots of questions, legal questions about intellectual property rights, about contracts, about technical things, about skills and guidance and examples. So all that is needed to give people guidance how to do this and to give them this framework. And once you have these three things in place, then you can start and grow capability and capacity in your market. And that is what you need to generate the lever and to make it a very strong industry in your nation and in your country. So what we are doing now with the handbook is from this framework here, and you can see every corner here has just 3 bullet points. And we will come up with recommendations and example for every bullet point, what a national program should encourage and should do and should not do, maybe, in order to implement and action these items. So now the other bit, this is about this common performance level. The problem we always have, I explained that already, the question is, what is a BIM project? So if someone at German Rail says, we are now procuring BIM projects, I said, well, that message, that there's no content in what you just told me. I don't understand it. That's about as valuable as me saying, yesterday I bought a book or I read a book. What kind of book? A thriller? A love story? Doesn't mean anything. Because there is so many things that we can do on a project. Can anyone in the room tell me if this is a BIM project or not? What criteria can we see? What characteristics? We can see that there is a virtual 3D model of a building or an asset. There's some windows open here in the background, so indicating there's some sort of information probably. We can just see that there are 2 people looking at the screen. Maybe they're working together in a collaborative way. But still, can we answer the question? Is this a BIM project? Who knows? No one knows. Why don't we know that? Why do we not know the answer? Because BIM is not defined. There are so many things we can do. So when we design, when we plan something, when we create documentation, 2D PDFs or deliverables, we can do it in 3D, we can do it object-based, and a lot of people have started doing this already. It's quite common already to do it that way. When we coordinate the different disciplines, it is so much easier to do it in 3D. You get such a much better understanding of what goes on, and the process in what is now described in the ISO standard 19650, we heard that name before, that is the process for coordinating information and data. So if we implement that, great. And a lot of people are already implementing that. A lot of projects are doing clash avoidance and clash detection. That's quite common. That's a very common BIM use case. A lot of people are doing 4D modeling or 5D modeling. That means we start doing or bringing information together from planning, from project management, cost, time, and planning data. Great. We're already taking digital data on site. We're using augmented reality and other things for clever things on site. Brilliant. And we're handing over digital information into facilities management systems and into operations. Again, fantastic. So who can answer the question now, how many of these do we have to do BIM? All of them? Just 1 or 2? Which one? We don't know. And that's the answer why we can't tell if something is a BIM project or not. That means we have to be more specific. And this is what we're trying to do with this. We will recommend to all the public procurers in Europe, when you procure a project, and that's why it's so relevant to you, because you will see that in the future. And it's not going to just happen in the public sector. There will be a time when the private sector picks up on that and will just follow it, because that happened in other nations as well, where the public sector started and the private picked it up. So we are, and I can't share that with you yet, that's the frustrating bit, because it is work in progress in BIM terminology and has not reviewed by the General Assembly yet. But what we will do is we will have these 4 categories. And there will be, for example, under policy something where we say we highly recommend that you have something like a BIM contract, at least as an appendix to the other contract in place. And we highly recommend maybe that you should have a template for that already ready and reviewed for your next tender. Something that falls under policy is also, for example, what is called the employer's information requirements. If you've heard the term before, it is written in the ISO 19650 standard that the client at the beginning of a project should specify their information requirements. What information do they need, to what level of detail, at what point in time, in what format? And that specification becomes part of the tender and then later on part of the contract. So you can imagine that these kind of things will be written into here. And if you want to have a guess what a EU first performance level could look like, I can only recommend that you look at the level 2 from the UK. You look at the digital plan or roadmap in Germany that has also a first target level defined, that you look at the Dutch levels and a couple of others. All that information is freely available. And then you probably will come up with a very good guess of what this first performance level could look like. And I'm sorry that I'm not able to share more of that with you to date. It will be published very soon. And again, we will then in the handbook have recommendations for all these different items as the first criteria, how people should go about it and grow the capacity, capability, and all the rest of it in their nation. So what we see, what we observe is the public leadership is already growing. We see definitely accelerating national adoption of plans and standards. We see definitely that the private sector work is also picking up on BIM and processes and standards. There are more common standards emerging, and hopefully we will see a growth of a digital construction sector in addition to our traditional sector. Thank you. That was it from me. I'm still here for the rest of the day if you have further questions. There is a website, eubim.eu, and there's a summary of what we're doing. And the handbook will, as I said, hopefully be published next year latest. Thank you very much for your attention.